Well, welcome to the Sunday School lesson. We start a new quarter of work, and we're going to be dealing with the book of Hosea. Hosea is an interesting book, to say the least. I was interested in the commentaries and how many different ways they thought you could interpret the book of Hosea. I'm going to do it just like I was taught. Now, I'm not going to get into all the various theories. I will tell you that chapters 1, 2, and 3 are autobiographical. They are simply the story of Hosea and his life. When you come to chapter 4 and go through chapter 4 through 14, we're going to find the whole scene changes, and we're talking about God and his people rather than Hosea and Gomer. We're talking about God and his people. And we'll see that transition as we come to it. And we even pick up some of it in chapters 1, 2, and 3. But it is a book that is the only place I can find where the entire structure of the book is trying to tell us the story of God's breach with his covenant people and using marriage to identify and to illustrate that breach between the man and his wife, or God and his people. And so it becomes interesting in places to try to be sure that we're talking about Hosea and Gomer, and we're not talking about God and Israel. So I'll try to be careful at that point to make known, here's what we're saying at this point. But essentially, chapters 1, 2, and 3 are the autobiographic sketch of Hosea, and then chapter 4 through 14 is God in relationship to his covenant people. The lordship of Christ has been broken, and he's going to try to restore it. Now, just a few comments, and I'm not going to go into a deep introduction. But one of the problems with Israel was that they wanted to worship the false gods. They wanted to worship especially the gods of Baal. Now, the thing they did not understand is how different God is than the god of Baal and idol worship. Number one, there is absolutely no integrity in idol worship. None whatsoever. There's none. And there's a reason. There's no accountability in idol worship. There is no God-likeness in idol worship. They simply have the little idol, the figurine, whatever it might be. Maybe a totem pole. But no matter what it is, there is no integrity, there is no accountability, and there is no God-likeness. Now, I want to ask myself the question every time I go through this: why would you want to worship something that has ears that cannot hear, a mouth that cannot speak, eyes that cannot see? Why would you want to worship that kind of God? Why would you want to worship a God that simply has absolutely no way to move from one place to another unless you carry him from one place to another? You see, the difference in God and the false god or the idol worship, the difference is I do have integrity with God. My whole life is built on my belief in the integrity of God. God keeps his promise. God does what he says he was going to do. We live by the promises of God. Sunday I preached over, or Sunday a few days back, I preached over at Westside Baptist Church. And I said to them, you cannot impede, you cannot do away with, you cannot nullify the promises of God. Age cannot nullify it. For instance, let me illustrate what I mean. Abraham, when he should have been packing it up and retiring, Abraham was packing it up to leave. He was going on a journey with God. and he's going to watch for that city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. He's going to be following God, and he's building his entire life on the promise of God. You can't do it with you. You cannot destroy the promise of God by you. Take David. David was just a shepherd boy, still with the smell of sheep on him, came out of the woods, came out of the mountains, came down to meet Goliath just as a boy. When everybody else was running away from Goliath, David was running toward Goliath. He wanted to know the will of God. He had integrity. The promise of God was, I'll take care of Goliath. And God did through the sling of David. So my point is this. You cannot thwart the promise of God. God's going to carry through on his promise. We just don't want to miss it. Don't miss the promises of God. God said, if you will, I will. I want to know all that I can about the promises of God and how to get in on the promises of God. You can't thwart even by bad circumstances, you cannot thwart the promises of God, as we're going to see in this book of Hosea. Now, that's all I'm going to be saying about the idol worship that he's going to call them back from to himself through Hosea the prophet. Let me just give you some background, some introduction to the book through the prophet Isaiah. His name means salvation. Salvation. His genealogy, he is the son of Beri, which means my well or my spring. He refers to the family line. It must have been a significant family to just simply mention it. He is obviously a native of the northern kingdom. Now remember, the kingdom is divided. There's not one Israel at this time. There's Israel to the north, and then there's Judah to the south. And so he's talking to the nation. He's from the nation of Israel, and he's going to be dealing with the whole bunch, but he's going to say to Israel, God's going to take you out, and he's going to rebuild. And we'll see that as we go through. So he refers to the major cities of Samaria, Bethel, Gilgal, the lesser cities of the valley of Achor, Adam on the Jordan, Ramah, Gibeah, Gilead, all of this. He knows the geography of the land, and he seems to walk us through that geography on a rather regular basis. He never names his hometown, never tells us where he's from. He was obviously, in my opinion, and I'm not alone in this, he was a farmer. He doesn't tell us he was a farmer, but when you get into the book and start reading, he knows too much about farm life and village life not to be a farmer. I never will forget when I moved to my first farming community as a pastor. Now, I started pastoring in the city. I started my first church was in the city of Phoenix, Arizona. I came to have a population of about 1 million people when we were there, and that was in 1957. And so as a result, moving from the city pastorate to a rural pastorate was some kind of a shock when I understood the difference in mentality. Now, the farming area that I mentioned, I went to Aledo, Texas, and the church was almost 100 years old. I was leaving a church that was only about maybe less than 10 years old, and we had started it from scratch. And so it was a whole new, different concept. But it was a dairy farming community. And dairy farming communities are very regimented because they have to milk those cows each day, at least twice a day. And they have to do it on a regular schedule. They have to feed them on a regular schedule, milk them on a regular schedule, take their milk to where it has to go on a regular. It is a regimented type community. Now, that was not true in Phoenix. It was just blowing and going. Just blowing and going. And so it was quite a move, quite a difference. So I think he's a farmer, because I realized when I got to Aledo, Texas, I knew nothing about dairy cows. I knew cows were usually black with white spots or white with black spots. I never did figure out the difference between the two. But those cows, interestingly enough, just a sidelight, I was amazed that they would name many of those cows and they would call them by name, and the cow would come by name to the farmer. It was quite an interesting thing to behold. I'd never seen that before. So it was a whole new thing for me, a whole new attitude, a whole new concept. I did not know how to speak the language of farm. But here is Hosea, who obviously knows how to speak the language of the farmer. So I think he was a farmer. Some think he was a Levite. I don't think so. I think he was a farmer. So we'll just take it at that. Whatever he was a prophet. He was respected. He had a grasp of history and of world affairs. That's not unusual for farmers, by the way, to have a grasp of what's going on in the world. They take the time, and they have the time, when they get the crops in and they lay the crops aside, when that simply means they're finished hoeing and plowing. They're just waiting for the harvest. When that crop is laid aside, they have time that they can do other things. And they keep up with what's going on in the world today. So here is Hosea, has a grasp of history. He has a moral development in his background. You can tell he has been with the Lord and that he's now going to have to struggle with this tempestuous message that he's going into. Now, there are a number of interpretations about this passage. Some say Gomer was not a prostitute, that she was into the cults that were prostitutional, and she had not given herself yet. Now, I don't know, folks. I'm not going to get into, there's about 8 different translations, 8 different ways that you can look at what takes place in the book of Hosea. Now, here's my take. Gomer was a prostitute, and God made an unusual decision in asking Hosea to marry a prostitute. An unusual decision, one of a kind, never happened again, so that he can use that as an illustration of the marriage that he has with his covenant people. And what they're doing in that marriage is the same thing that we do in marriage one-on-one. So that's how we're going to start. Let's take our Bibles, turn to the book of Hosea, and we'll start reading Hosea chapter 1. The word of the Lord came unto Hosea, the son of Beri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Those are the kings to the south. And in the days of Jeroboam and the son of Joash, king of Israel, in the beginning of the word of the Lord by Hosea. And the Lord said to Hosea, Go take unto thee a wife of whoredoms, and children of whoredoms, and of the land, for the land hath committed great whoredom, departing from the Lord. So he went into Gomer, the daughter of Diblam, which conceived and bare him a son. Now, that's the most interesting part of the story. Once we get beyond that, I don't know why God would have made this decision. But you see, this is God's decision, not my decision. And God makes it purposeful. And he's going to use it in a certain kind of way. And so the Lord said, he conceived and bare him a son. And the Lord said, Call his name Jezreel. For yet a while, and I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu, and will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. And it shall come to pass, At that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Now, as he comes to write about what he's going to do and how he's going to bring it about, you have to know that he has a deep understanding. Now, Hosea has a deep understanding of the prophetic call of God. He doesn't spend a lot of time discussing with God, why have you called me to do this? Why have you asked me to do this? He simply follows what he believes to be God's will for his life. I jotted down about 4 things here. This exalted view of the prophetic call that's in the mind and heart of Hosea. As he believes that he is a spokesman for God. You'll find that in chapter 12, verse 10. He is a spokesman for God. Secondly, he is a preservative of God. That simply means he is in the business of preserving what God says rather than seeking to destroy what God says. And 3, he is a by the way, you'll find that in chapter 12, verse 13. He is God's corrective. That's found in chapter 6, verse 5. He is God's corrective. He has to tell you something. He's the Father. He tells the Son. He's the Father. He tells the prophet. And so he is the corrective. And he's going to correct Israel through the voice of Hosea. Now, God could have just wiped them out and started all over had he wanted to. He wants to do the covenant relationship thing. And so we're going to see this builds on all of the concept of marriage and divorce. And so here is God saying to Hosea, I want you to be my corrector. I want you to tell them what to do. Correct them when they're wrong. I want you to be the preservative. I want you to have the quality in your life that I have in my life. I want you to be my voice. I want you to cry out on my behalf. And he's going to do this, number 4, in spite of public scorn and contempt. People don't understand when you're trying to make things right. They just don't understand, and they don't care. You can stand up and preach until you're blue in the face. I know because I have. Till you're blue in the face, telling people if you do this, it's going to do this, it's going to happen this way. And they'll look you square in the eye and say, preacher, I don't believe that. And then go away, and that's exactly how it plays itself out. I was on the telephone not long ago with a young man who was a young man in my ministry. He's no longer a young man. Young man in my ministry in one of my churches, who got into social drinking. And I kept saying, Bill, you have no background for this. You don't know what this is going to do to you. You're taking an awful chance. I just wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't take the chance. And he thought, well, as he said, I can handle it. Well, he couldn't. He couldn't. It's a sad story. Sad story. Took him down the tube for a while. Thank God for a good wife who stayed by him and brought him out of the darkness. He's been sober now for quite some time. And I'm so glad. He calls me and tells me every now and then, I love you. He calls me every now and then and says, thank you for staying by me, not deserting me. That's what God is saying to anyone who becomes his voice. Now, it's an awful thing. Not an awful thing in terms of bad. It's an awesome thing, I probably should say. It's an awesome thing when you come to realize, when you stand up to preach on Sunday morning, God could change your life through what I say today. That's the voice of the Father. So in spite of public scorn, he's going to continue to do what he knows he's right. Now he marries Gomer. The faithlessness of Gomer is the faithlessness of the people of God. A tragedy in unfaithfulness. Go take for yourself a wife of harlots. And as I'd said to you earlier, I believe he married a prostitute. And having married that prostitute, I think one of the children was born to him, and two of the children were born as children of the prostitute by some other man, not by Hosea. Now, that's my understanding. That's my take on it. And I think I'm close to reality at that point. So the divine, take yourself. And so this idea, Hosea is first among the prophets to come to use the symbol of marriage in this way, the terms of harlotry. The first child is born. Hosea claims it as his own. He claims him, names him Jezreel. Yahweh sows. By the way, names in Israel usually had a meaning. Names in Israel usually had a meaning. Yahweh sows. So on the fertile plains of Megiddo, there is a place called Jezreel. In fact, it's a place where when Elijah called down the fire on Mount Carmel, and he got the word that Jezebel is going to get you just like you got them, he starts running. And the first place he runs to is from Mount Carmel to Jezreel, which is about 17 miles. And he actually outruns the chariot of Ahab. So he's trying to get out of the way of Jezebel real fast. So here's the location. Jehu, who was the king, purged this area, seeking to change the spiritual content. Now, you don't shed the blood of people to change content of spirituality. But Jehu apparently thought this would get their attention, and he struck a blow against Baal worship. But as so oftentimes happens, he struck a blow against Baal worship, but he continued to allow and apparently to participate some in the worship of the golden calf. So here is problems in Israel all over again. By cutting off the line of Jehu, causing the house of Israel to cease, all of this in the valley of Jezreel. And so he starts having the children. Look at verses 6 and 7. And she conceived again and bare a daughter. God said unto her, call her name Lu-Rumaha, for I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. Ru-Amah. Excuse me. So the daughter is born. Now, he does not claim this to be his daughter. Notice that. He did claim the son, Jezreel, to be his son. I'm battling some allergies today, so stay with me. Jezreel is his son. He's born. He has a purpose. He's telling him what he's going to do with that purpose. Now, the second child comes. He does not claim this to be his child, which is unusual. And look at it. And her name, God even gives them the name, Lu-Rahama. Lu-Rahama. Best I can do. For I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them. I will utterly take them away. But I will have mercy upon the house of Judah, save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by bow or sword, battle, horse, or by horsemen. Now, when she had weaned Lu-Rumaha, she conceived and bore a son. And then God said, name him Luami. And so he names him Luami, which means, look at it again, For you are not my people. Verse 9. You are not my people, and I will not be your God. Yet the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, and cannot be measured in number. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, You are not my people, there shall be said unto them, You are the sons of the living God. Well, getting into this new book of Hosea, I want you to stay with me, because it changes so rapidly in so many places, and I want to be as clear with it as I possibly can. But apparently the first child is the child of Hosea and Gomer. The next two children apparently are not fathered by Hosea. We'll talk about that a little more next time. Thank you for watching. God bless you.